Hi, everyone. Thank you all for jumping on. We will go ahead and get started in just a couple of minutes. We're still waiting on a couple of attendees to go ahead and hop on. For those who have just hopped on, thank you all for joining us today. We are still waiting on a couple other guests, so we'll get started soon. All right, everyone, we will go ahead and get started. First off, thank you all for joining us today for the presentation of our Friendly Driver program. Just for an update for those who do not know, last year this program was called the Bicycle Friendly Driver program, and we actually introduced a pedestrian segment, which obviously made it the Friendly Driver program. Okay, just one second. Okay, perfect. Excuse me. All right. So for today's agenda, we'll go through quick introductions. We'll talk about vulnerable road users, the consequence of error, controlling the lane, pedestrian walkability. We are all traffic part 2, which includes common crashes, residential neighborhoods and school zones, reducing conflict through better design, and lastly, all closing remarks. So before we get started and jump into what we do as an organization, my name is Layla Horton. I'm the program manager for BikeWalk NC. Primarily, my duties include all of the grant management, which is super duper fun, as we may know. But in addition to that, I run the Friendly Driver program, which again is a statewide educational tool that we use to inform all motorists. And then also talk about sharing the roads with pedestrians and bicyclists. Joining us today, and who will also be presenting with me, he'll be tackling the second half of this presentation, is Oliver Sindall, who's our community outreach coordinator, and helping us as well is Terry Lansdale, who is our director. All three of us will be working the chat, so feel free to drop any questions, any comments in the chat, or using that Q&A button on your screen. And in addition to that, before we get even further into the Friendly Driver presentation, for more information on how to bring the presentation to your community, please feel free to reach out to me directly, again, in the chat via Q&A. And of course, I'm pretty sure everyone has my email, but if not, I'll drop that in the chat as well, and we can go forward from there. So BikeWalk NC is a nonprofit organization with this mission to lead, support, and inspire advocacy and educational efforts throughout North Carolina for an environment that is fairly, safely, and equitably serves bicyclists, pedestrians, and others using active mobility and human-powered transportation. For more information, please do not hesitate to visit bikewalknc.org. In addition to that, we would also like to thank the Governor's Highway Safety Program, Vision Zero, and also Watch for Me. So with the Friendly Driver program, we have 7 target counties, which include Wake, Mecklenburg, New Hanover, Forsyth, Guilford, Durham, and Cumberland. Although we only have 7 target counties, it does not mean that we do not look at what occurs in other counties throughout North Carolina. Currently, these 7 counties have the highest rates of accidents involving pedestrians and bicyclists. So at this time, we do attain just these 7. However, we do expect for more counties to be added in the near future. So why this course? Again, I only put 2 bullet points on this slide, but it's so many other reasons why this course is so important. Everyone is entitled to the same roads, as we know, as avid bicyclists and avid pedestrians, and focusing on walkable areas and walkable cities throughout North Carolina, we have to understand, and we do understand for the most part, that sharing the roads is essential to a healthy environment. In addition to that, one anecdote that I like to include is around January, or in January, we actually presented to the police department of Cumberland County, of Fayetteville in particular. And the day after we presented, a pedestrian was unfortunately hit and killed on one of the main streets of Fayetteville. And a lot of the individuals that participated in our course did not know some of the rules and regulations that involve pedestrians. So we like to introduce this course and be able to present the Friendly Driver program to individuals and groups that are in need throughout North Carolina, but also to groups that just want to learn more information. So to start off as well, we should already know of these bullet points presented on this slide. Without a driver's license, it is against the law to drive/operate a motor vehicle, sit in the driver's seat while the engine is on, and steer the vehicle while another vehicle pushes or tows it. In addition to that, must complete a state regulator driver's test along with extensive driving portion. And then learner's permits are granted to those between the ages of 15 to 17. But as we may know this information, we don't know a lot of the other information that's included with sharing the road as a bicyclist and what it means when a bicycle is a vehicle. So we always like to include this video too with our presentation. Is there an acceptable goal for roadway fatality and injury reduction? So again, sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, but the answer is always going to be 0. And the reason being is, as we look over this slide here, we will see some of the accidents that occur and some of the accidents that take over North Carolina's highest rates of bicycle crashes. And I'll give you guys a minute to look over that. And then here is that video.
I would probably say maybe 1,000.
Hundreds of people probably die here.
Say 1,800, thousands.
Thousands of people.
I would say alcohol,
Texting.
Phones, technology, GPS, people just not paying attention.
I believe a lot of times no seatbelts, alcohol.
texting and driving.
Drug driving.
No.
Yeah, no.
No.
I don't think so.
Nah, I don't think so.
50%? Every year should reduce at least by like 10 or 15%.
It's hard to put a number on it because you want to say 0.
I know 100 would be amazing.
Oh, 0.
Oh, absolutely 0.
0 fatalities in the family. 0.
0.
0, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, ideally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely 0.
Absolutely, guys. And again, that vision is 0 when it comes to fatalities and just in general, all accidents that occur that involve both pedestrians and bicyclists. Excuse me. All right. Once again, crashes happen all over North Carolina. Approximately 1,000 crashes happen a year in North Carolina, involve a person on a bike and a motorist. 60 of these involve serious injuries to the bicyclist. On average, about 20 individuals on bicycles are killed in North Carolina each year. And lastly, children and young adults are the most frequent victims. So on the road with vulnerable road users and what the definition is for vulnerable road users. Vulnerable road user is a term that is mainly used to describe an unprotected or those who are unprotected by outside shield as they sustain a greater risk of injury in any collision with the vehicle and are therefore highly in need of protection against such collisions. So this may include pedestrians, roadway workers, those who utilize a wheelchair or an electric scooter, and bicyclists as well. So with that being said too, in the state of North Carolina, a bicycle is considered to be a vehicle, which means they are entitled to the full lane. So as mentioned before, This is just a reiteration of the slide previously. And again, it explains by law, in North Carolina, a bicycle is considered a vehicle and is entitled to the same rights as other vehicles on these roads. A person on a bike is required by law to follow all rules of the road except those that by their nature can have no application. So we like to say in the bicycle world and also in the transportation world, drive your bike and what that means. Interchangeably, we use controlling the lane and what that means too. As mentioned before, a bicycle is entitled to the full lane because it is considered a vehicle in the state of North Carolina. So again, there are certain things that you have to take note of as a bicyclist. Although you are considered to be a vulnerable road user, there are certain things that you are able to do to help prevent some of these accidents from occurring, such as being visible and being very predictable, riding on the right, stop at all stop signs and lights, obey first come and first serve rules at intersections, yield and signal when changing lanes, and then also choose correct intersection positioning. I also like to mention too, although we may know what we are doing as a bicyclist, the motorist does not necessarily know what we are doing or are privy to some of the rights, rules, and regulations associated with bicycling. A lot of times, especially in the state of North Carolina, I grew up here, we like to say that we're the best drivers and the most patient drivers, but if we're being completely honest, we are not. So at times we can be very impatient and choose to rush the bicyclists. Again, you are entitled to that full lane. You are a vehicle. These rights and these rules pertain to you directly. So with our next portion, we like to include the consequence of error and what that means. So the consequence of error defines a person or just an event that includes any risky or dangerous behaviors. We are all guilty of this every single day when we choose to hop behind a wheel. Again, in the state of North Carolina, we think that we are the best drivers, and we are absolutely not. I am guilty of saying this as well. So again, we as drivers are responsible for an instrument that weighs more than a great white shark and statistically more lethal than a firearm. So it is important to be sure that when you're hopping behind the wheel, you are as safe as possible. You are considering all standards as much as possible. So again, sometimes we drive while texting. I'm guilty of it. Everyone is guilty of it. We feel like we need to send that last message out, or we forgot to tell our significant other that we are heading home. So sending out that message as we're driving. Sometimes we drive after a beer or two that may lead to 3 or 4 or 5, driving after work. I know it can be stressful, but being cognizant of this. And sometimes we want to change a song on a playlist. Super guilty of this. I love my tunes when I'm driving. We treat traffic as a personal game of Tetris. That's self-explanatory for the most part. Sometimes we drive just 5 over the speed limit. Again, that 5 is actually probably 12 to 15. And even if we don't do any of these things, or say we don't do any of these things, we drive on narrow roads or over blind hills and on busy city streets where cyclists and pedestrians may be present, and we are not being cognizant of the road that we are riding on. Again, we will go over a little later on what or the rights of a pedestrian. And also, again, as mentioned before, I think it's like my 4th or 5th time mentioning it, a bicyclist is entitled to the entire lane. Controlling the lane with that as well. So the tale of 2 signs. I know I am unable to see everyone in this webinar. However, I'll give you guys a couple seconds rather to think of what the difference is between these 2 signs. Okay, so we may or may not be pondering it. But again, there's very obvious differences, right? The white sign has a speed limit of 25. It has a, may use a full lane sign. The yellow one is a little more basic. This is the one that we tend to see more than likely in smaller areas and smaller communities. The yellow sign, just to note as well, is a warning sign, meaning that if you do not follow directions or if you do not follow the rule associated with this sign, there's not necessarily a penalty associated with it. As we know, as those who have more than likely received a speeding ticket, those who do not follow anything that's on those white signs, there is a penalty for it. The yellow sign is something that we were seeing in the early 2000s, and it was very, very prominent in larger cities when a lot of campaigns in the Vision Zero campaign, such as the Vision Zero campaign, and just a lot of campaigns that focus on the advocacy surrounding bicyclists started to occur. That's when the signs stating the bicycle may use the full lane signs were actually became prominent. Okay, so I showed you all those two signs, but then we also see signs like this, which are very contradictory. We have signs stating that we have rights to the full lane, and we also get motorists being mad with us and upset with us when we have to enter the full lane when there are bicycle lanes. But then at times there are lanes like this, and there are signs like this that are trying to help us, but may not be doing the best job. But I guess at times it is the thought that counts. But as we see, it's not conducive at all. So this is what sharing the road can look like. Again, we're thinking we might be in the rush. This is a scenario that we're just making up. We might be in the rush. We see a bus on our side. We also see a bicyclist obtaining that full lane. So what if we squeeze in between the two? As we see, we could potentially run the bus off the road. We could potentially run the bicyclist off the road, causing much damage, or potentially causing much damage. So again, to reiterate what's mentioned before, when a person riding a bike moves closer to the center lane for their own safety, this is a determination that the person on the bike makes. So why do individuals choose to take the full lane, even when, as you see in the picture in front of us, there is a bicycle lane? There are multiple different instances that a bicyclist has to kind of understand and be aware of, be privy of as they are driving their bike. As we see some dooring on the side, we see some obstacles, someone is parked in that bike lane. There's some ongoing traffic. They need to make that left-hand turn. Considering all of this is super important. So again, I cannot see everyone's faces or hands, but do we think that this is legal or not? And I'll give you guys 3 seconds to think about it. And this is fully legal. Again, he is taking over that full lane. And that ventures us to our next point of pedestrian walkability. And again, North Carolina has done a phenomenal job with ensuring that pedestrians are covered just as much as bicyclists. So what does pedestrian walkability mean? Pedestrian walkability is a term used to describe an area when walking is a common form of transportation in the area suitable for comfortable walking conditions. So this may include, these zones may have a crosswalk, sidewalks that are wheelchair friendly, a lower speed limit, marked midsection medians, proper signage, and also respectable road users. So what are the facts? 150 to 165 pedestrians are killed yearly in North Carolina. In 2020, every 10 minutes a pedestrian was hit in North Carolina. Every 81 minutes a pedestrian is killed. Each year in North Carolina, motor vehicles injure approximately 2,000 pedestrians. 25% of fatalities happen inside of a marked intersection. 71% of these pedestrians killed were males. And lastly, majority of all accidents occur between 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. and from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. The reason being is I like to call 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. party hours. As we know, there are some that do enjoy beverages later in the evening, and they tend to walk home if they're in walkable areas such as Uptown Charlotte, such as Raleigh, such as Durham. And Durham also has the bullpen, which is a zone where you are able to, it's an open container zone. So again, they are able to walk home from there. But again, some of these individuals are intoxicated, may not be paying attention to the road, may not be paying attention to their surroundings. And then from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., a lot of individuals are heading home. Again, they're tired from a long day. They may not be paying attention to the road. As a motorist, you may not be paying attention to the road because you're just ready to get home. So where are pedestrians the most prevalent in North Carolina? Again, in gentrified neighborhoods, areas that are considered to be low socioeconomic standard, and areas that have government-funded facilities and organizations. And some common reasons why individuals choose to walk. Unsafe driving, pretty much self-explanatory from there. Or choose not to walk, excuse me, pretty much self-explanatory with there. Sidewalk conditions. Sometimes those sidewalks are not the best sidewalks to walk on. If they are wheelchair bound, those sidewalks tend to be a little harder to use. The quality of the sidewalks and roads. I'm from Charlotte. I actually reside in Charlotte currently. There is a street called North Tryon that some of us may be familiar with. It has plenty of potholes, plenty of cracks. There's trees that's falling down everywhere. Well, the question I like to pose is, why would I want to walk in conditions such as this? Unsafe neighborhoods, lack of available walking destinations. We always talk about wanting to get our youth more involved with walking and being a little more active. So that can include bicycling as well. The youth will not be, they would not want to walk as much if there's no place to walk to. It can simply include a Boys and Girls Club. It can be the YMCA. It can just simply be a gas station or a corner store. If they have no place to walk to, then what's the point of walking? And the quality of the residential area as well. So jaywalking versus mid-block crossing. We as a team love this slide, The reason being, of course, is we did introduce a pedestrian segment this year, but also jaywalking is a derogatory term that I'm sure we are all guilty of using. So as I mentioned before, it describes a person, in particular, someone from the country who does not know how to maneuver in the city. And such, or does not possess city etiquette. So again, this is a derogatory term used, and actually in the state of North Carolina, mid-block crossing is legal. The second bullet point states, marked mid-block crossing does not have traffic lights, but pedestrians still have rights no matter what. And I'll give everyone a minute to look over this slide here. This explains some of the pedestrian rights in the state of North Carolina. Again, North Carolina has done a great job with ensuring that pedestrians are covered and if they have rights. Every day, North Carolina in some of the larger cities, the more rural cities, or excuse me, the more rural towns, the smaller towns, just in general, they are growing at an exponential rate. There's high rises everywhere. There's luxury apartment buildings everywhere. North Carolina is becoming one of the more walkable states throughout the US. So again, I'm really, really glad that they introduced many of these pedestrian rights. So as mentioned before, we don't use jaywalking anymore. That's not cool. We use unmarked mid-block crossing. I know that is a very long term to use for someone who is choosing to walk in an unmarked mid-block crossing. However, do we think that this is legal or not? We should all be shaking our head yes, or giving me a thumbs up behind the camera. Perfect. And from here, I will allow Oliver to take over. We will actually be doing a brief break to do this transition. At any point in time, again, feel free to drop any questions or comments in the chat. We will be answering them from there.
Give me just 1 second. I apologize. There we go. So, again, Layla mentioned earlier, my name is Oliver Sendel. I am the community outreach coordinator with BikeWalk North Carolina. And my role is primarily social media, email communication, and assisting Layla with the Friendly Driver program, as well as the planning of the summit, which we have coming up. And I hope to see you all there in a few days. So jumping in section here, we are working on, apologize. There we go. So we are all traffic part 2, working on some common scenarios in sharing the road with vulnerable road users. So scenario 1 here pictures entering the roadway and turning into oncoming or turning right into traffic. So you'll see this intersection here. Basically, it makes no difference if oncoming traffic is a person on a bike or vehicular traffic. One instance here that's pictured in this photo, if you think about what we're looking for as you approach this intersection to take a right turn, just the number of considerations to take taken that come into effect here. So you obviously have the vehicular traffic, but if there was someone on a bike traveling left to right through this intersection, they may be going straight, they may be taking that turn lane, they may be on the sidewalk. One other consideration that a lot of people overlook is when approaching an intersection like this to make a right or to make a right turn, as a driver, your instinct is to look left. But the other consideration that needs to be made is to always look right as well. With a sidewalk present there, you may have either cyclists or pedestrians on that sidewalk looking across that intersection. Another consideration is the speed at which a cyclist is traveling. In the roadways, we know that you have commuter cyclists, recreational cyclists, all traveling at various speeds. And as drivers, many times people underestimate the speed at which some cyclists are traveling, which leads to crashes. So engaging with others at intersections. So one of the most common intersections where conflict's going to occur is at a 4-way intersection. But we just need to remember that it is first come, first serve at 4-way intersections. If a person on a bike arrives at the intersection, we treat them just like a vehicle. They have the right of way if they arrived first. Vehicle in an intersection should move forward first. If 2 vehicles reach the intersection at the same time, the driver on the right would proceed first. Unless expressly signaled by a green arrow or public safety officer, left turn yields to oncoming traffic, and oncoming traffic includes people on bicycles. One thing you'll encounter if you're on a bike at any point in time, there will be intersections where individuals will try and wave you through an intersection at a 4-way stop. This is a very oftentimes an attempt to be polite. However, we need to, as cyclists and motorists, proceed with the first come, first serve rule. That is the best way to ensure safety for all those at the intersection. Tips for turning at intersections. So in the picture below, this is going to jump ahead a little bit, but you have a bike lane, but the driver of this vehicle has entered that bike lane. That is something that drivers may do. You'll see some bike lanes, especially those that are now painted green, often show a broken white line as they approach an intersection. And this is for vehicles to be able to enter that bike lane to make that right turn. Likewise, a person on a bicycle may enter the traffic lane if proceeding straight to avoid being right hooked, which Layla mentioned earlier a little bit, and which we'll talk about briefly, which is where a vehicle will pass a cyclist to turn right and turn directly in their path of travel. That's what's called the right hook. And as mentioned, vehicle can move into the bike lane if present and not occupied by a cyclist to make that right turn. Yes, and to avoid that right hook, avoid overtaking a person on a bike turning right unless it is safe to do so. Passing others, as we can see from this slide, while overtaking a bicyclist, that is by far the highest type of most frequent cause of crashes with cyclists involving vehicles. So while passing others, when encountering slower moving vehicles, again, this includes bicyclists, slow down, do not pass unless it is safe to do so. Pass vehicles by going into the other lane, obviously obeying passing laws and lines, clear other vehicle before turning to the original lane. Obviously with cycle or bicycles being classified as vehicles, all this applies when passing a bicycle as well. So what is important to note when passing a bicycle, it's passing any vehicle, you should pass at least 2 feet to the left and shall not return to the lane unless safely overtaken the previous vehicle. And important to note, in a no passing zone, so a double yellow line, a driver of a vehicle can overtake a person on a bicycle if proceeding in the same direction, but they must provide 4 feet of space when doing so. This forces them to kind of clear the lane for that cyclist, and it is legal to do so on a double yellow in North Carolina when passing a cyclist. So again, we said when passing a person on a bike, the 2 feet is the legal minimum. Anything else is illegal. 3 feet is sort of the ethical safe distance, and 4 feet is legally required if safely passing somebody on a double yellow. So the best rule of thumb is change lanes to pass. It is the safest way to pass a cyclist, both for the driver and for the cyclist. And other considerations on why it is important and changing lanes is the safest way. Most lanes are not wide enough to occupy for a person to operate a bike safely with a vehicle. You can see this picture here. As vehicles get larger, particularly SUVs, they take up a lot of space, and given the space occupied by the cyclist, in addition to the safe passing distance, it is not safe to do so while traveling in the same lane. Obviously, mirrors, wheels, trailers all add to this, and large vehicles can create dangerous wind blasts, especially at high speeds when passing cyclists. So preparing to pass someone on a bicycle, treat them as you would any other slow moving vehicle. Make sure that you have adequate sight distance to pass. If you honk, be nice about it. Loud abrupt noises can startle riders. Don't pass until it is safe you can safely fully enter the other lane. And then, as we mentioned, the larger the vehicle, the more important this becomes. And then use your mirrors to make sure that you have passed the cyclist completely before returning to your lane, and signal your intent to do so. So some additional considerations while sharing the road. So dooring, which Layla mentioned earlier, That is when a parked vehicle opens the door to exit the driver's side, opens into traffic. Cyclists very often can be in lanes, especially in urban areas where you have parallel parking scenarios. This is something to take effect. We'll touch on one consideration, one step that drivers can do to make this safely and a little bit more safe in a minute. Visible considerations, driving into the sun. Why don't people ride on the sidewalks, and some of the illegal courtesies, again, those four-way stop signs. So the dooring zone, as you can see here, parallel park, when the door is open, obviously that infringes onto the space of the cyclist. This is another prime example of why cyclists would want to take the full lane of traffic, is to remove themselves from that door zone. Yeah, and so it is recommended that the cyclists stay at least 5 feet away from parked cars, and then there again, this puts them into that lane of traffic where they might take that full lane. One way to do that, avoid this, is for drivers to do what is called the Dutch reach. If you're in a parallel parking scenario, rather than opening the door with your left hand, if you reach across with your right hand, that is going to force your body to turn and look over your left shoulder to see any oncoming cyclists. So visibility. As motorists, you must have illumination that can allow you to see a person at 200 feet away, regardless of their clothing color. As pedestrians and people on bikes will know, it is definitely in your best interest to always wear high visibility clothing when traveling at night. But as motorists, you must make sure your headlights are properly clean and properly equipped to illuminate pedestrians and all others at that 200-foot distance. Required lighting for any vehicles. So obviously during sunrise, sunset, when you're not able to see at least 400 feet ahead. But you can see down here, every bicycle should be equipped with a reflex mirror reflector and a front headlamp when operating after dark. This is obviously different weather conditions. As weather conditions change, especially when running headlights, you can see there that normal running headlights, you have plenty of visibility, but taking into consideration and slowing down when visibility becomes impaired in low light conditions, low visibility conditions such as fog. This is something for both cyclists and drivers to be aware of, and that is that car headlights are intended to illuminate obviously the path of travel directly in front of the vehicle. So if you find yourself at an intersection or crossing an intersection such as this, even when burning headlights, a vehicle perpendicular to you at an intersection may not see that oncoming bike. So be aware, take your time at four-way stop signs where cyclists might be present and when low light conditions are in effect. So sun glare is another important thing to take into consideration. If you find yourself in an environment where you may be encountering pedestrians, cyclists, being aware when driving into the sun, again, slowing down, being more cautious, that your visibility is impaired when riding into the sun. This is something that I take into consideration a lot with a cycle, as when I'm out riding, knowing full well that when I am riding into the sun, so are the drivers behind me, so their visibility may be more limited, and just being aware of that as I ride. So some additional road sharing aspects is those work zones. We mentioned earlier that vulnerable road users extends beyond bicycles, pedestrians. It also includes those working in work zones. So do not change lanes in work zones. Be patient and steady with the flow of traffic. follow signage, and workers must be able to see you. Obviously, winter conditions in North Carolina, we don't get this as much as some areas up north, but when it does happen, we oftentimes have less experience driving in those conditions. So using your low beams, again, what we saw earlier with those foggy conditions is that using high beams can limit visibility or produce a little bit more glare. And obviously slowing down, that is the key to a lot of these scenarios. We all have been taught that speed kills. So slowing down, not tailgating, allowing more space between vehicles, and consider sharing the road with others. Why don't people just ride on the sidewalk? As a cyclist, I've had this yelled at me more times than I care to think, just to get on the sidewalk. But there are a lot of good reasons why cyclists would not use the sidewalk. It's a higher risk to pedestrians, same as riding a bike on an interstate highway is not allowed or is not advisable or even legal. Riding a bike on a sidewalk puts the same sort of low speed and high speed usage into conflict. Pull out some driveways and parking lots. It makes you more visible to drivers being in the roadway, trash cans and parked cars, and then it maybe is in fact prohibited by local ordinance to ride on the sidewalk. Again, I mentioned this, the illegal courtesies, somebody waving you through a stop sign, sometime, or that might be a four-way stop, just adhering to the laws as they are, and basically if you act in politeness, it could be construed as it's safe to proceed. It's best not to do so and let the cyclists make the best decision based on the laws. So if you live in an area where there are tracks, you'll see this bicycle lane takes a turn, and that is the railroad tracks and other light rail tracks can be hazardous to those on bicycles. So always wanting to cross those perpendicular. So you will see that bike lanes such as this accommodate that. But just know that that is another situation where bicyclists may choose to take the full lane in order to be able to cross at a safe angle. So some residential areas and school zones. Obviously, where there's school zones and residential areas, those are the highest concentrations or one of the higher concentrations that you are going to see or encounter pedestrians and bicycles in roadways. So less than 1% of total traffic casualties, school bus transportation is noticed as the safest option for school-age children. So again, be on the lookout when in residential areas and in school zones. You are going to see more people backing out of driveways, more people on bikes and out walking, lower speed limits. And yes, again, there more shared usage. So this is a quick review of when to stop for a school bus. All right. Hopefully everybody remembers that from driver's ed. So one way that cities and planners can work towards having safer roads and reducing conflict is through better design. You'll find what we find through surveys is, and this is true all over North Carolina, as we review bicycle and pedestrian plans throughout the state, we see these questions answered the same way virtually every time, and that is many people say they want to bike more. They worry about getting in conflicts with vehicles is one of the most frequently mentioned reasons for not riding more often. And very often 64% respondents would bike more if there were more bike lanes and physical barriers separating them from cars. So the complete street pictured here, basically this is a street that is designed around all forms of transportation, bus travel, light rail, bicycles, pedestrians, not just intended for vehicular travel or automotive vehicular travel. So bike lanes obviously very often are the most widely used forms of this complete street concept. You'll see more often cities using green as an indication of bike lanes, and that is just indicating that or alerting drivers to the higher likelihood of shared use. Sharrows, which we've all seen, obviously this one here in Charlotte. These obviously indicate areas in which cyclists may be present, but even when sharrows are not in use or not visible, they are not the only place that cyclists are allowed to use roads. So, and it just indicates another place in which cyclists may be more likely to be taking that full lane of travel. Again, bike lanes here, you see a standard bike lane there on the left, and a more advanced separated from vehicular travels, obviously with these bollards, directional, and the inclusion of that green paint marking to make it more visible to drivers. Coexisting peacefully with bike lanes. So we saw this earlier with the sign asking people to share the road, but was in a bike lane. These are not parking areas. Don't park in a bike lane. Do not drive in a bike lane. Again, those dashed lines indicate transition zones or conflict zones as you approach intersections, allowing vehicles to enter those lanes to turn right, and always yield to bicyclists in a bike lane. So shared use paths, obviously providing a little bit more separation for pedestrian bicycle travel. This increases the feeling of safety for those utilizing it, and thus increase the usage of those facilities. So the bike box is another one seeing more often, and that is a space for people on bicycles to be able to enter and get ahead of traffic when entering an intersection. This allows them space to turn left without impeding traffic. So two-stage left turn. There again, you see entering the intersection before turning left there on the right-hand side. This bicycle, rather than proceeding straight through the intersection, they would enter that box before turning left to make the left turn. And then obviously one of the best ways, most enjoyable ways for people on bikes to separate themselves from roadway traffic is the shared use or multi-use greenway path. All right. So in closing, if you're going to take away anything, basically, is that bicycles are vehicles and should be treated as such, and therefore are entitled to the full lane of traffic. Scan, yield, signal, and slow down. These are ways to reduce potential conflict and keep everyone safe on the roadway. Pay attention at intersections and when passing. The safest way to pass a person on a bike is to change lanes. And then finally, obviously, all roadway users are people. Treating them as such provides, a little bit more empathy and understanding, and creates a safer environment for everyone. Some additional resources for you. Obviously, our website at BikeWalk North Carolina, North Carolina Vision Zero, again, targeting that zero fatalities is achievable, and working towards that. Some examples of complete streets, as well as cycling resources from around the state. All right.
All right, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today with our Friendly Driver program. As mentioned before, our Q&A is completely open, as well as our chat section too. Terry did a great job with dropping in our emails. As you'll see, it's programs@bikewalknc.org, and also Oliver's as well, outreach at bikewalknc.org. For any additional questions, feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat now or in that Q&A section now. We'll go ahead and stay on just for a couple more minutes. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us today. We're super excited about the summit that is coming up in a matter of some days. It's right around the corner. We're finalizing a lot of details now, and we're super excited to see everyone. If you all have any questions pertaining to the summit, please feel free to reach out to both Oliver, and I, and we'll be sure to provide those answers to you all. But otherwise, you all have a great night. Thank you all for joining us today. I've dropped those slides in that Q&A section too, but if you would like those personalized slides, reach out to us as well. Thank you all. Mo, thank you for your input with that. And again, as mentioned before in my response to another question previous to yours, it really just depends on the community. I know with some areas it is fully legal, but then in some it is not. For instance, in Durham, it is not legal to ride your bike on the sidewalk.